Welcome back to the Grant County Election Forums for 2014. Tonight's discussions are brought to you by the Marion-Grant County Chamber of Commerce, the Governmental Affairs Committee, the Chronicle Tribune, Hoosier AM/FM Radio, and WIWU TV 51. I am Alan Miller, the moderator for this evening. This forum focuses on the two candidates for Grant County Prosecutor, James Luttrell, who is the Republican, and David Payne, who is the Democrat. Each of the parties will have 2 minutes for opening statements, and after that, we will go right to the questions. We're going in alphabetical order, so that means we'll be starting with Mr. James Luttrell for his 2-minute opening statement. Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you. I think I have a mic problem.
Just hold it in your hand and talk into it, and we'll fix it.
Sorry about that. Good evening, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much to Indiana Wesleyan and to the Chamber. We appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you. The Office of Prosecuting Attorney is the most important decision on the ballot this year. And why is that? It's because the prosecuting attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of the county. I have been a prosecutor since the days I got out of law school, working first for Steve Goldsmith in Indianapolis and Marion County, then for Steve Johnson here in Grant County. For 12 years, I was chief deputy prosecutor, and I have been a prosecutor now since 2003. The prosecutor has been described as a shepherd of justice. That is a really apt term because it describes the leadership that's required to be a prosecutor. And I've been proud to be a leader in the courtroom as a strong, forceful advocate for justice for victims. I've been proud to be a mentor in my office in helping to train younger prosecutors to be effective voices for justice in the courtroom as well, and a leader among the community in working with the stakeholders and the partners that law enforcement has to work with, the police agencies, the hospital staff, the DCS, and those who work on behalf of our abused children. It's been great to be a part of that process and to be a leader in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luttrell. Now, Mr. Payne, your 2-minute opening statement.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to point out two things that I think could have a dramatic impact on our judicial system in Grant County. First of all, we have a major problem with drugs, and with the drugs comes problems with thefts, burglaries, armed robberies, and murder. These are all closely associated to the drug problem. The drug problem is exacerbated by the fact that there hasn't been aggressive prosecution. We need to tell these drug dealers when they come in from out of state that Grant County is a very bad place to do business. We need to stop the plea bargains with the drug dealers. We need to say you've got two choices, plead guilty or go to trial. We need to say you can't work as a CI and get out of this mess by making a couple buys and then be back out on the street to go back to business as usual. That's a major problem in this county, and it can be alleviated if we simply address the issue in terms of if you're dealing drugs, you're going to go to prison, and you're going to stay there for a long time. The second issue I think I'd like to talk about is the plea bargaining process itself. Most of the people in jail, or if not most, then an awfully high percentage of them are not serving time. They are there awaiting trial, and often they're there for 6 months, 8 months, a year, or sometimes longer. That process can be moved a lot more efficiently if we say you've got a deadline to take a plea. If you don't take the plea within that time, you're going to go to trial. We need to cut that time frame back. We need to say after 3 months, 6 months, you're going to either have to take your plea or we're going to take the case to trial. It's very simple. The prosecutor has the ability to set that 11th hour. He can set it 3 months from now, or he can set it a year from now. And we need to get away from the habit of trying cases or not trying cases that are settled on the day of trial. That needs to stop.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Our panelists this evening are Ed Thurman, who is the news director of Hoosier AM/FM Radio here in Marion, and also David Pennicuff, the editor of the Chronicle Tribune. We're going to begin the questions with Mr. Thurman, and the first question will be for Mr. Luttrell. You will have 2 minutes to answer Mr. Luttrell, and then Mr. Payne will have a 1-minute response. Mr. Thurman?
Thank you. Jim, how can you as prosecutor maintain fairness and impartiality in criminal cases, or can you?
Well, it's not only you can, you must. Fairness and impartiality is required of every prosecutor. The objectivity that's required. If there's a case in which I cannot be impartial, then I get off of that case and get a prosecutor from outside of Grant County to handle that case. Impartiality is one of the most important parts of our system. As being that shepherd of justice, you're to be someone who is to be also a servant of the law. You serve the law and you enforce the law. You don't go after people, you don't go after causes, you simply take the facts and enforce the law based upon those facts, and you do it fairly and impartially. I'm proud to speak with passion and zeal on behalf of victims, and I do so. But I also have a responsibility to see that the due process rights of every person accused are protected. I also have the responsibility, as I stand to my feet on behalf of the state of Indiana, to make sure that people who don't even follow the justice system or pay attention can rely upon the fact that fairness and justice go hand in hand. And I've insisted on it with my staff, and I've continued to do so and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Mr. Payne, 1 minute rebuttal.
I don't know that we have an impartiality problem. I think people are treated fairly generally across the board. The policies need to be established for that, and I think Mr. Luttrell has done that. I think, if anything, we've seen too kind of heart toward drug dealers, and that needs to be changed. Beyond that, I think it's been a fair system.
Question number 2, again from Mr. Thurman, directed toward Mr. Payne, and you have 2 minutes to answer the question.
David, how can the prosecutor's office be made more efficient and still be able to handle all the cases that you have to investigate and prosecute?
Set an early deadline on those plea bargains. Tell a guy when you hand him the plea bargain, you got 2 months to think about it, and I want an answer by then. If you want to quibble about it and we want to deal on it, that's fine. We can quibble about it, but you're not going to decide the day of trial that you're going to take that plea bargain. It's no longer on the table. We need to move the people through the system a lot faster. That will help alleviate your problem with the jail. You'll have a lot fewer people in jail because they're going to be processed a lot faster. There's no reason for a guy to have more than 2 months to think about a plea bargain. He doesn't need to think about it 6 months or 8 months along. We also need to, that helps everybody. It helps the defendant even if there's an early timetable. His attorney then knows that he's got to prepare for trial because this case is going to trial. In fact, what's happened with both the prosecution and the defense side is everybody's expecting that deal to come through. Everyone's sitting back saying, well, I'm not going to take those depositions. I'm not going to do as much as I need to, maybe because I think the guy's still going to take a deal. Well, now it's the day of trial. It's the day before trial, and the guy says that I'm not taking the deal. If you know that ahead of time, you prepare. Both sides prepare. It would be wonderful if we could say that much ahead of time, a month, 2 months ahead of time, this is the deadline. Take the deal or go to trial. And if we do that across the board, the biggest problem we got is convincing the defense attorneys that we're serious about it. And if you establish the policy and you follow the dictates of the policy, you will prove yourself serious about it, and the defense attorneys will get the message. As a defense attorney, I would love to know. I just had one that accepted a plea agreement 5 days before trial. I continued 9 hearings in order to be prepared for that one trial. Those 9 hearings all got pushed off to another day. And the system there's a lot of congestion in the court system as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luttrell, 1 minute response.
Plea agreements are driven by the seriousness of the case, the strength of the evidence, and by a pursuit of justice. We can't always know 30 days after a case is filed what the strength of the case will be ultimately down the road. I oppose continuances routinely, and almost all the time the continuances are brought by defense trying to continue the case, often in good faith. But generally speaking, it is it hurts the prosecution's case, and it hurts the efficiency of the system. I've supported having plea cutoffs, and our judges all have plea cutoff deadlines. And if I make a plea offer and it wants to be accepted on the day of trial, the eve of trial, that plea offer is off the table. And that's the way we conduct business.
The next questions come from Mr. Pennicuff. First to Mr. Luttrell, and again, 2 minutes, Mr. Luttrell. David?
Jim, since you've been in office, there have been a lot of successful convictions of violent offenders and drug offenders. There has not been, it would seem, anywhere close to that regarding white-collar crime and regarding public corruption. Is that because we don't have problems with white-collar crime and corruption in our community? Or is that just an area that we're not going after with the same degree of aggressiveness?
I certainly don't apologize for giving attention to violent crime. We have had, in the last 2 years, I believe we filed 9 murder cases. 2 of those individuals are still awaiting trial and are presumed to be innocent and will have their day in court. 7 have been convicted, the other 7, and they are serving and beginning to serve sentences everywhere from 60 years to 95 years to 145 years to life without parole. I don't apologize for that. I think we have had a number of white-collar crimes, various types of embezzlement crimes in our community. They haven't been reported or covered with much regularity, but we have had them. We take those seriously, and we're always looking for more resources from the state because many times those cases are more difficult because of lack of forensic accounting services and so forth, and we're working with the state police and others to try to improve that. I believe that we are a community that, in comparison to many other communities around the state, that do not suffer from public corruption. It hasn't been brought to my attention, and I've not had cases in which to prosecute those. But when we have had public corruption cases, we have prosecuted them, and we have gotten convictions.
Mr. Payne, 1 minute response.
If the suggestion is that white-collar crime is being swept under the rug, I don't know of that occurring. I don't know of any cases that I necessarily feel should have been prosecuted that were not. I hate to give points to the prosecutor on that score, but the reality is I don't know it being a problem.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Pennicuff, for Mr. Payne.
Mr. Payne, 11 years ago, your mother was the victim of a homicide, and you've repeatedly ran for prosecutor since that time. Can you explain the connection between the two, if there is one?
The connection between the two is our Grant County prosecutor got involved in my mother's case on the civil side and basically stopped me from pursuing that investigation. I was offering the kind of help that I thought could have been successful, or at least would have increased the chances of being successful. It wasn't 11 years ago I ran on that principle. I'm still running on that principle. I'd like to see something done not only in my mother's case, but in every unsolved homicide case, that we take another look at those cases, that we seek outside help, and that we not be afraid to say, let's bring in some guys that know more about this than we know. So it's not just an 11 years ago problem. It inspired me to run this time as well. And it still inspires me to run, not only for my mother's case, but for all of those unsolved murder cases out there, that we need to dole those things out among the deputy prosecutors and say, Take a look at this case and tell me if there's any additional witnesses that should be interviewed. Tell me if there's any more recent tests that could be performed, DNA test. We need to bring in the kind of people that have the expertise to get the job done. If you read my book, you saw a case mentioned there. That case was the Hostess House murder case. It wasn't identified as such. But the reality is a call was made to an Indianapolis detective, and he put us on the path to solving that case. It's not that he was such a great guy or smart guy, it's he had a lot of experience. When I inquired of experts, I said, I want an expert that has investigated at least 100 homicides. The detective I talked to looked around the room, a room this size, saw 10 investigators there and said, well, that would be all of us. We don't have that kind of expertise locally. We need to reach out and get it. We need to solve these crimes. Thank you.
Mr. Luttrell, 1 minute response.
Thank you. Betty Payne's murder was an unspeakable, horrific crime. And any decent person in our community, certainly those who loved her and knew her, but everyone else, me included, want her killer caught and prosecuted and held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. I went to that crime scene so that I could talk to the officers and hear directly from them while they were there working that case. I, along with the lead investigator, Lieutenant Dorsey at the time, contacted the leading Indiana State Police crime scene investigator and said, come here and help us. And he worked side by side Sergeant Robin Young, a very skilled Marion Police Department crime scene investigator, and they worked that case. They did so because I asked them to. I've talked to the laboratories, and we continue to work on not only that case, but the other cases that Dave has referred to see under today's forensics, what can we do about, what can we do with that case? Is there any more answers that can be given? And Marion Police Department has solved many complex, difficult, violent crime cases, and I'm proud to work with them and with the Indiana State Police and the other agencies.
Back to Mr. Thurman. Question for Mr. Luttrell.
Jim, what quality, is there one, that sets you apart from your opponent in this race?
Obviously, experience in the role of a prosecutor is critical. Dave Payne has been a local attorney for many years, longer than I've been an attorney, and he's a skilled trial lawyer. But I have experience in not only prosecuting cases, but leading a team of prosecutors and a team of law enforcement in working on cases. I can't count how many murder and attempted murder defendants I've prosecuted, but it's over 50. And some of those were extremely complex forensic cases, circumstantial evidence cases, multiple victim cases, insanity defense, self-defense. I don't care, I've seen it all. And I think that ability to bring that experience to bear is critical and important. The other quality that I bring that I believe sets me apart is an ability to be a leader, that to work with a team, to listen, to be respectful of local law enforcement, but challenge and critique them at the same time, to work together in a multidisciplinary team fashion. It was that type of leadership I brought to bear that brought us the First Light Child Advocacy Center, which I helped to spearhead, and then many others now have picked that up and continue that. There are other ways in which I've worked patiently and behind the scenes with law enforcement, with probation, with our courts, and I believe that that experience in handling so many cases and to be a mentor among other prosecutors sets me apart. Thank you.
Mr. Payne, 1 minute, please.
I worked as a police officer in the Air Force for 4 years. I worked as a police officer at the University of Maryland as I was taking my undergraduate degree. I've been a deputy prosecutor. I've been a long-standing criminal defense attorney in this county. I know the criminal justice system. I know how it works, and I can lead that team, and I think I can do a better job.
Okay, Mr. Thurman, question from Mr. Payne.
Mr. Payne, it seems like we hear little about juvenile cases. We're not allowed to report on them much, and that's fine. Can more and should more emphasis be placed on taking care of juvenile cases so that these kids don't repeat them when they become adults?
I think that system needs to be addressed, but unfortunately, I don't know that the prosecutor plays a leading role in that. Unfortunately, by the time they get to the juvenile system, they're already in trouble. We need to reestablish the foundations of our society and build the kind of groups and the kind of youth activities that keeps kids busy in a positive way. PAL Club and those kinds of things, and for me at least, it was Boy Scouts. We need that kind of infrastructure, but I don't believe the prosecutor leads the charge on that. By the time they get to us, we can still guide them and hopefully get them back on track, but in many instances, it's just too late.
Mr. Luttrell?
Thank you. Unfortunately, many times when I'm in juvenile court, I come away knowing that we ought to call it parent court sometimes. It's oftentimes it's kids as a result of messed up homes and difficult home situations and parents who haven't done their jobs. And one thing I've done as prosecutor is to work closely with our probation department and our Department of Child Services to take kids out of juvenile court who are really kids in need of services, and don't call them perpetrators of crime, but treat them as victims of crime. But I tell you, when we have 15-year-old thugs out there who commit very serious crimes and commit adult-like crimes, and the evidence is there and justice requires it, I will seek to waive them to adult court and prosecute them as adults.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Pentecoff with a new question for Mr. Luttrell.
Mr. Luttrell, we've had a difficult summer regarding crime and violent crime. What advice do you have for people who are frankly frightened because of the amount of crime happening on our streets? And would you recommend that people purchase a firearm and learn how to use it?
That's a very personal decision, and I would not discourage people from taking what steps they can to protect themselves. I can think of three ways. One is to have a firearm available and make sure that they can keep it safely and that they're trained and understand how it's used. Another way is to have, a proper type of dog, not the dog that Debbie and I have had for a number of years. Wouldn't be much of a watchdog, but having a dog that could maybe assist. But the third and the most important thing we can do, and I think this is critical. I was just talking to a law enforcement officer just in this parking lot a couple of weeks ago, and he said, after this horrible crime that happened down the street on 38th Street here this summer, he was mingling with some of the neighbors, and they said to him, "This is the first time I've talked to my neighbor. This is the first time I've got out. I'm walking the streets. I got to meet people next door. I got to meet people around the block." That will go farther in protecting a neighborhood and a community is when we practice neighborliness, and it's out of some people's comfort zone, but I think it's really important. It's horrible that it took such a horrible crime to cause people to start thinking of their neighbors. But it was I guess, good news among the bad that there were neighborliness starting and carrying on the last several months since that crime, right in this neighborhood right here. People getting to know each other, black and white, rich and poor, educated and not so educated. It didn't matter. They were people, and they were getting to know each other, and they found out they liked each other, and I think that's important.
Mr. Payne, 1 minute response.
I'm honestly not real comfortable with the idea of loading up your six-shooter and somebody's giving you a problem, blow them away. I just find that uncomfortable that we have to go to that extent to feel safe and protected. I do think being vigilant is a good idea. I think the neighborhood watch system, which was just kind of discussed in some measure of detail, is a good idea. You know, I shudder to think, and I don't believe that we could ever suffer from a Kitty Genovese syndrome as they had in New York with 36 people hearing this girl scream for help and eventually be killed. She screamed for help for like an hour, and no one made the call. They didn't want to get involved. I just think that there's something sad about that whole scenario, and we don't live in that kind of society, thank goodness. We will get involved. We will kind of keep an eye open for one another, and that is our best source of protection.
Thank you. Mr. Pennicuff, for what will be the final question in this forum for Mr. Payne.
Do you expect the crime rate to increase or decline or not change substantially in the next 4 years?
It depends on who you elect for prosecutor. If you elect me, we're going after drug dealers. And don't call me and tell me your son's a good kid and he got hung up with the wrong crowd, because if he's a drug dealer, he's got a problem. I think if we can address the drug issue, I think we'll address the crime issue. It's the underlying cause of crime in Grant County. We need to stop this CI system that lets the guy buy his way out of trouble by simply making a couple buys, and then he's back out on the street. We need to say to that guy, you don't have that choice anymore, and go back and tell your buddies that this isn't going to work anymore. This system of dodging the bullet, the get out of free jail card, is no longer being handed out. The CI system underscores this more than anything else. We'll continue using CIs, but they'll be first-time offenders on possession only, not dealing. If you're dealing, you're in the big time. If you're dealing, you face serious consequences. Thank you.
Mr. Luttrell, 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, they're only going to face serious consequences if the evidence is gathered against them. And Mr. Payne has mentioned a problem with confidential informants. And I actually would prefer not to use confidential informants, but they're a reality. And since the penalties for mere drug possession for a first-timer are so slight, you can't give much incentive for someone to reveal information about their drug supplier. So what we've done in Grant County now for really the last 3, 4, 5 years is increase the use of undercover officers. We've coordinated with other counties, and we're using undercovers. We're getting rid and getting away from the confidential informant or CI problem that he's talked about. Drug dealers bring violence, there's no question about it. And there's 40 people right now who've been prosecuted the last year and a half in our prison, serving several years of prison because of drugs.
Thank you, gentlemen. We come now to 1-minute closing statements, and we're going to begin with Mr. Payne. 1 minute, please, Mr. Payne.
And we have a lot of people on the street who worked as CIs that are just as bad and still in business, but they managed to get themselves out of trouble. If you happen to read my book, you'll notice that we talked about a drug house two doors down from my mother's. That wasn't the target that day. The target was one at 12th and Boot Street, about 2 blocks away. Drug houses were so prevalent and still are that when you go to one drug house and they're sold out, they can send you to another one a couple of blocks down the street. We've got to do something about the drug problem. We eliminate the drug problem, we will cut crime. We will not eliminate crime, but if we can make a 25% dent in our crime statistics, that would be significant. And I do believe that kind of dent can be made if we aggressively pursue drug dealers. Thank you.
1 minute closing statement, Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you. It has been an honor to be your prosecuting attorney, to lead dedicated, passionate, underpaid deputy prosecutors in our courts day in and day out. And I think it's the best job a person could have with a law degree, is to stand up and speak for those who can't speak for themselves, for children who have been abused, for elderly who have been exploited, and it is an honor to have been able to serve in that way. It's an honor to be able to lead and to work with and sit at the table with law enforcement officers, child protection workers, and so forth. People ask me, how do you do the job you do, with see what you see? And I want to say, I get to see pain and heartache, but I also get to see courage and valor and virtue. And it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes our forum for Grant County Prosecuting Attorney. Our two candidates, Jim Luttrell, the Republican, David Payne, the Democrat. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll welcome the candidates for the Marion Community School Board. Stay tuned.